Bam! So you know what this is? This is a macro lens. Due to an overwhelming request, I wanted to make a video giving you a quick macro photography trick, but I'm going to give you some tips as well. And then I might branch this off into a part 2 and do a more live thing. But you guys wanted to learn about macro photography, get some tips, and not just, oh, buy a macro lens, because guess what? There's more to it than just buying a lens, even though they are pretty damn sick. Even though that these tips aren't necessarily in huge order or anything like that, one huge thing I'm going to have to help you understand is your aperture. Now, everyone thinks that right here I have a Nikon 60mm 2.8 lens. So typically when you have a lens and you have a 2.8, no matter what focal length you're at, you could shoot at 2.8, so you could shoot wide open. But with a macro lens, it doesn't necessarily work like that, and I'll get into extension tubes in a minute and everything like that. But if you're using a macro lens, your aperture is key. Your focus is extremely shallow because of how this works. And basically a macro lens, a true macro lens, will give you a full 1-to-1, meaning, so say you have a picture of a ring, a coin, bug, flower, anything like that. It gives you a true blown up, full quality, high res image of what it would look like in real life, but actually 1-to-1, right where it should be, not just zoomed back and you crop it and everything like that. So that's why a lot of people use a macro lens. But your aperture is extremely important when it gets to this. And as I said, that's in regards to depth of field. It's very shallow. You could be at f5.6 and still be very shallow and miss focus quite easily. And you're probably thinking, well, how is that? I'll cover all that in a minute. But with this, you're going to have to make sure that you're on a tripod, because that's pretty essential. I jumped ahead a tip there, but tripods are really essential if you want to do get steady work. But with your aperture, you're really going to have to learn that as you get closer to your subject. So in regards to a macro lens, they're focal length pretty much, so they're primed, so they're like 60mm, 100mm. Canon has a nice 100mm. I like Nikon 60. There's 105, 135, all that kind of stuff that you can get. But as you get closer to your subject, so say the subject is right here. So say the lens is right here. So back here, you would probably be able to use a 2.8. But as you get closer, and as you get closer, if you want to zoom in on, say, the lettering here or something like that, you're going to lose stops. So you're going to go down a stop or two. So you're going to think that you can use an f2.8, when in reality, if you're this close, you'll be automatically stuck. You'll see your meter go down to your aperture, and it will become automatically an f4, 5, 6. That's just because you're cutting down on the distance and the amount of light you're letting in onto it. So it isn't necessarily a 2.8 lens. So when you get when you get a prime lens, if you think of micro macro photography as they call it, your aperture, your 2.8 isn't necessarily a constant aperture, because it does technically float as you get closer to your subject, because the focal length is getting closer in the distance. You are going to lose light, and it is going to stop down automatically. There's not much you can do to it except add something down the line. Jumping into macro lenses, I think they are highly essential if you're doing this full time. I use this a lot in my weddings. That's why I invested in these. So macro lenses, they will get you a true 1-to-1 look. They will be crisp, clear, very great shallow depth of field. So that is highly essential. If you're really doing this full time, you should invest in one, because you will make your money back. But say if you're just a general hobbyist, enthusiast, I'm not one to tell you that you have to buy macro only. No, I'm here to tell you that you can also buy extension tubes. I don't like them personally because I think they're a little junky. You can get better quality ones. Some of them are kind of more, the glass just isn't good. You'll see a lot of more chromatic aberration. But basically thinking it as you have your camera, you're adding them towards the rear of the lens. So you're putting your camera here, you're putting on an extension tube, which probably is usually about this big or so. You put that on the back, and it's basically using a magnifying glass, in a way, in a short word, and getting this glass here and magnifying the image onto the sensor. So it's kind of dragging it closer. So if you're using a 70-200, 24-70, your zoom lenses, those are pretty good. So if you're just doing some fun stuff, not necessarily professional, I'm sure professionals out there use them, you can use those as well. They're a good alternative. They are very cheaper in regards to buying a lens, but I honestly advise, if you're doing this full time, get that as well. But for general sake, for fun, why not? There's extension tubes out there, but just make sure you get a good one, because if you get a cheap like plasticky mount type of one, it could literally snap right off of your camera. So watch out what you're buying, but that is also a good alternative. Wood. Now, why did I just show you that? Well, backgrounds in your macro photography is essential. Different colors, different textures to really mix it up. A lot of people make the common mistake of it just having some kind of boring, dull background. So whenever I'm on a shoot, I'm at the bride to groom's house, typically the bride's house, I bring a certain amount of backgrounds. Some of them are in my car already, but one quick thing, especially, and I'm emphasizing ring shots because that's what I mainly do with them, is I have this little Leica platform, and I realized that I can use this wood texture right here. Say if they don't have a deck in the back or anything like that, I can use a nice texture like this to get some great bokeh, some great lead in for the ring shots, and that works out a really, really, good bit as well. Just any kind of color you can add, mix in with the ambient light, and you can get something as well. That's something a lot of people don't think about, and backgrounds can be key for adding great emphasis onto what you're trying to magnify with macro photography. Right. It's also something essential. I'll pop up a picture here showing my friend Ty, who was assisting me at the time as well, showing that I was doing macro photography and I needed to fill in light, because as you're getting close, as I was mentioning your aperture, you're losing light. You want some kind of glimmer, some kind of something on the lens to give it a little kick. So I like to use a little micro light panel that I have to add something, just to add a little emphasis. You can freehand it. It's simple to use, and it's something that can be really key. So adding light is great. If you can pop in a slave flash, that would be awesome as well, just to fill in, to give it more kick, even though, you can raise ISO and like that, but I like to give my rings a little bit of a glimmer to make them stand out. They're not just dull, they're not just sitting there. But another huge thing that photographers will use is a ring flash. And basically what that will do is go around the front of your lens. It would go around the front, kind of where your hood would be. You normally won't be able to use a lens hood with those. And it plugs into your hot shoe up top, and you click right in, and you can use it there. So every time you fire the shutter, it acts like it's as an onboard flash. So they're popular as well, just like you would use those in kind of closer beauty shots and everything like that. And hinting at earlier, I was mentioning focus and how it can be really tough because of shallow depth of field, and I am honestly not lying here. It can be extremely tough to grab focus because it is so shallow. Yeah, higher shutter speeds work, but once again, you're dealing with light, you raise the ISO, all that kind of stuff, etc. But your focus is really, really shallow. I highly recommend using a tripod if you can't. Maybe a monopod would be a great investment as well. But it can be really tough to get what you need in focus, because even f2.8, your focus distance is like this. But even at f4, it might go like this, just because you're closer to your subject, and that really matters, and it can be very tough. So just be careful when you're focusing and you're just starting out and you're, maybe you invested in a lens, you're like, why can't I get this in focus? Because it actually is kind of tough, and it just takes something to get used to. So keep that in mind as well. Focusing can be tough. I actually invested in a monitor, which I keep looking up to occasionally, to show you some things, because that has peaking and focus assist. So basically it outlines what is in focus, so I can see that my rings or my whatever I'm taking a picture of are in clear, crisp focus. So a lot of those are the basics that can really get you started, and I emphasize everything that can really take precedent besides being patient or everything you always hear, just buying a lens. I'm here to kind of give you a little trick and something really cool. So this is kind of a what do they call a free-for-all type of focusing thing, to where if you ever noticed, open up the back of your camera, so take off, or the back of your lens, I'm sorry, take off the back, and if you ever look through it, you can notice that, say you look at a subject, and as you move it closer or further away, you could actually see that you can get something in focus. You could say, oh, if I hold it here, it's actually in focus, but if I move it here, it's tough. It's kind of hard to explain unless you do it yourself. So take off the front lens cap. But you can free focus this as well. So what you would do is you be very careful, make sure it's not a dirty environment or anything like that, but it can really work, especially if you're on a budget, if you're using an 18-55 and a body or whatever. So you take off the lens cap, so that's free. So I would take off the lens cap to this. I would actually flip the front side in here, so you're having something like this, and you could actually, and it would just be in the matter of, going through your viewfinder and moving this further and closer to the sensor, so that way you get an image to appear through the backside into the front. Now it is kind of confusing. It will take some getting used to, but it will work. So just kind of keep it something like this and moving around and look through your sensor too. You see something in focus, and guess what? You could actually get a pretty insane shot for something like that. So that's basically using the back of the lens to get a macro shot.